America's car industry has given the world plenty of famous classics, but hidden in the shadows are machines so strange, so rare, and so downright bizarre that most people don't even know they exist. These aren't just odd-looking, they're the kind of cars that make you stop, stare, and ask, what on earth were they thinking? Some were bold experiments, others one-off prototypes, and a few were simply the result of wild imagination gone too far. Today, we uncovered the 12 most weirdest American cars you've never seen before. Rare sights, forgotten creations, and the strangest rides ever to roll out of the USA. Watch till the end, and don't forget to subscribe.
The 1936 Stout Scarab is one of those rare, almost mythical machines that doesn't just stand out in automotive history, it feels like it belongs to an alternate timeline altogether. Conceived by visionary American engineer and inventor William Bushnell Stout, the Scarab was decades ahead of its time, yet so unusual that it never had a chance to succeed in the market of its day. To look at one is to see a curious blend of science fiction futurism and Art Deco elegance, wrapped in proportions that seem alien compared to the upright, squared-off sedans of the 1930s. Stout's creation was less a car and more a moving social space, a traveling lounge for the well-heeled dreamer who valued comfort, conversation, and exclusivity over speed or conventional beauty. In an era when automobiles were still largely derived from horse-drawn carriage proportions, long hoods, exposed fenders, and upright bodies, the Scarab looked like it had rolled off the set of a Buck Rogers film. Its design was radically aerodynamic, inspired by aircraft fuselages, with smooth, flowing curves, enclosed wheels, and a bulbous, almost insect-like profile. The name Scarab wasn't just marketing flair, it truly resembled a giant beetle, its rounded body tapering slightly at the rear. There was no obvious front in the traditional sense. The flat, sloping nose and integrated headlights blended so seamlessly into the bodywork that onlookers often had to guess which way it was facing. Beneath this daring skin lay engineering choices as unconventional as the styling. Instead of placing the engine up front like nearly every other car of the time, Stout mounted a Ford flathead V8 at the rear, freeing up the space in front for passengers and creating a nearly flat floor throughout the cabin. This allowed him to design what was arguably the first true automotive interior built around the idea of a living space. The seating was arranged not in rigid rows like a traditional car, but in a lounge-like configuration, with chairs that could swivel to face each other. Passengers could chat, read, or even hold small meetings while the Scarab rolled along. The materials inside were warm and inviting: plush upholstery, Art Deco detailing, and generous use of glass to bring in light, giving it the air of a mobile cocktail lounge. In fact, one of the few owners was famously quoted as saying, "Driving it felt like being in a moving Art Deco cocktail lounge," perfectly capturing the mood Stout was going for. Practicality, however, was not the Scarab's strong suit. Despite its aerodynamic form, the car was heavy and not particularly quick, with performance more akin to a bus than a luxury sedan. The rear-mounted Ford flathead V8 was reliable but modest in output, and the car's weight, coupled with its unusual proportions, meant it was happiest at a steady cruising pace rather than spirited driving. It was also extremely expensive, reportedly priced at around $5,000 in the mid-1930s, a staggering sum at the time, enough to buy a Packard 12 or even a modest home. This high price, combined with its oddball looks, ensured that it remained more of a curiosity than a commercial proposition. Production numbers were vanishingly small. It's believed that only about 9 Scarabs were ever built, each essentially handcrafted, making them some of the rarest automobiles of the 20th century. Most were sold to wealthy individuals or used as promotional vehicles for Stout's other business ventures, and many disappeared from public view for decades. Today, only a handful survive, most in museums or private collections, where they draw fascinated crowds who often have no idea such a vehicle ever existed. From a historical perspective, the Scarab can be seen as the world's first true minivan, predating vehicles like the Volkswagen Type 2 by more than a decade. Its focus on passenger comfort, open interior space, and a flat floor was a vision of family and group travel that wouldn't truly take hold until the post-war years. Stout, who was also a pioneer in aviation, approached the Scarab like an airplane designer, streamlined for efficiency, built for long-distance comfort, and unconcerned with the norms of the existing auto industry. The few who did own a Scarab often found themselves the center of attention wherever they went. People would gather around to inspect the strange, beetle-shaped vehicle, often peppering the driver with questions. What is it? Who made it? Where's the engine? One surviving owner recalled that strangers would even knock on the windows just to get a look inside. It was the kind of car you didn't just drive, you presented it to the world, almost like a piece of moving modern art. In the end, the Stout Scarab was too strange, too expensive, and too early for its own good. But its influence, subtle though it may be, can be traced through decades of automotive design. Every time a manufacturer builds a vehicle with a focus on open-plan interiors and modular seating, they're echoing an idea William Stout had nearly a century ago. While most cars from the 1930s are remembered for their chrome grilles and upright elegance, the Stout Scarab endures as a rolling glimpse into a future that never quite arrived, a rare and beautiful ghost in the machine of automotive history.
The 1947 Playboy A48 is one of those oddball chapters in American automotive history that makes you wonder how different things might have been if timing and money had worked out. Despite the name, it had nothing to do with Hugh Hefner's magazine, which didn't even exist yet. In fact, the name Playboy was meant to evoke lighthearted fun, freedom, and youthful energy in the booming post-war years. Unfortunately, as some owners later joked, the name often caused more confusion than recognition, with strangers assuming it must be a promotional gimmick for something other than a car. The story begins with three men in Buffalo, New York: Lou Horowitz, Norman Richardson, and Charles Thomas, who believed that the post-war American car market was ready for something small, stylish, and affordable. At the time, Detroit was still cranking out large, heavy sedans based on pre-war designs, and the compact car segment as we know it didn't exist in the United States. The trio envisioned a car that would be easy to drive in crowded cities, economical to operate, and versatile enough to appeal to young families, retirees, and women drivers who might have been intimidated by the bulk of a full-sized sedan. Their answer was the Playboy A48, a tiny two-door convertible with a wheelbase of just 90 inches, shorter than a Volkswagen Beetle's. Its styling, while clearly influenced by the rounded, upright forms of late 1940s American sedans, looked almost like someone had taken a regular car and run it through a shrink ray. The proportions were squat and compact, with minimal overhangs, a stubby nose, and a slightly bulbous trunk. Yet the Playboy's real party trick was its roof, a steel folding hardtop that could transform it from a snug coupe into an open convertible in a matter of minutes. This was long before such roofs became fashionable in Europe and decades before they reappeared in modern cars, making the A48 one of the earliest production vehicles in the world to offer the feature. Under the hood was a modest but dependable 40-horsepower four-cylinder engine sourced from Continental. While this hardly made it quick, the Playboy's light weight and small size meant it could keep up with traffic, at least the slower, post-war kind. Top speed was around 60 to 65 miles per hour, and fuel economy could exceed 30 mpg, a figure that would have impressed many frugal buyers in an era when gas was cheap, but cars were generally thirsty. The transmission was a 3-speed manual, sending power to the rear wheels, and thanks to its short wheelbase and narrow track, it could turn tightly and park easily. Traits American drivers wouldn't value until small imports began arriving in the late 1950s. Inside, the A48 was surprisingly well appointed for a low-cost car. Upholstery was simple but attractive, and the dash layout, while minimal, had a clean Art Deco-inspired symmetry. It could seat 4, in theory, though rear passengers had to be forgiving about legroom. The folding hardtop mechanism was manual but well-engineered, stowing neatly without taking up too much luggage space. This was one of the car's selling points in promotional materials, which touted its ability to combine the comfort and safety of a sedan with the open-air joy of a convertible. On paper, the Playboy A48 seemed like it could have been the perfect post-war people's car, affordable, stylish, and technologically novel. But the fledgling company faced enormous hurdles. The big three automakers dominated the U.S. market, and smaller independents like Nash, Studebaker, and Kaiser Frazer already had deeper pockets, established dealer networks, and post-war momentum. Playboy Motors simply didn't have the production capacity or the financial stability to compete at a national scale. Efforts to raise funding from investors stalled, and the company never transitioned from small batch assembly to mass production. By the time operations ceased in 1951, only 97 examples had been built. Most went to early customers in the Buffalo area or were used for publicity runs. Today, surviving Playboys are rare but cherished among microcar and orphan brand collectors. They still draw attention at shows, partly for their novelty and partly because the folding hardtop was such a forward-thinking feature for its day. As for the name, it has continued to spark conversation for decades. One former owner recalled, "People used to stop me just to ask if it had anything to do with the magazine. I'd tell them no, but the car came first, and they'd just laugh. Half the time, they didn't even believe me." The irony is that the car's greatest hurdle in the modern world might be the same thing its founders thought would make it catchy: the Playboy badge, forever overshadowed by an entirely different kind of cultural icon. The 1947 Playboy A48 remains a fascinating what-if in American automotive history. A car that was small before small was cool, practical before practicality was fashionable, and innovative in ways Detroit wouldn't revisit for decades. Its obscurity today is less a reflection of its merit and more a casualty of timing, money, and the sheer weight of industry giants it tried to take on. In the right alternate universe, it might have been America's answer to the Beetle, just with a more provocative nameplate. The 1958 Ford Edsel Citation has become one of the most enduring cautionary tales in the history of the American automobile. Not because it was mechanically unsound or hopelessly impractical, but because its styling and marketing missteps combined into a perfect storm of bad timing, mismatched expectations, and public bewilderment. By the late 1950s, Ford believed it had found a gap in the market, something positioned between the mid-range Ford lineup and the more prestigious Mercury brand. This gap was meant to be filled by the Edsel, and the Citation was its top-of-the-line model, the supposed crown jewel of an entirely new marque. The car was meant to be bold, distinctive, and aspirational, the kind of thing a rising middle-class family might buy to announce they had made it. Unfortunately, what Ford executives thought was daring, the public found downright strange. The centerpiece of the Edsel's now infamous image was the vertical horse-collar grille. Designers claimed it was inspired by classic 1930s and 1940s styling cues and was intended to make the car instantly recognizable even from a distance. In reality, it made the front end look perpetually shocked, or as some unkind wags put it at the time, like an automotive parody of a certain anatomical feature. The grille's deep oval shape dominated the front fascia so much that it overshadowed the rest of the car's lines, which were otherwise fairly typical for a late 1950s American sedan, long, low, and festooned with chrome. The Edsel Citation was not just about an unconventional nose, it came with an entire package of quirks.
The rear featured boomerang-shaped taillights that, when illuminated at night, gave the impression the car was being driven in reverse. Inside, Ford tried to wow buyers with futuristic touches, the most notable being the Teletouch push-button transmission controls mounted in the center of the steering wheel hub. This design, while novel, proved awkward to use and was prone to electrical issues, leading to complaints from owners who accidentally changed gears when honking the horn. The dashboard was a flashy array of sweeping speedometers, bright trim, and colored indicator lights. Mid-century optimism distilled into metal and plastic. Mechanically, the Citation was no slouch on paper. It rode on a stretched 124-inch wheelbase and could be had with either a 345 cubic inch V8 producing 303 horsepower or a larger 410 cubic inch E475 V8 delivering 345 horsepower. Power steering, power brakes, and even air suspension were available, making the Citation as technologically advanced as many of its competitors. But these features were overshadowed by the public's reaction to its styling, and worse, by the Edsel brand's bungled launch. The timing couldn't have been worse. The car debuted during a mild recession when buyers were gravitating towards smaller, more economical vehicles, not large, chrome-laden status symbols. Ford's marketing campaign promised a revolutionary driving experience. But when shoppers saw the Edsel in person, they found a car that, aside from its unusual looks, wasn't drastically different from existing models and often cost more. Furthermore, the Edsel name had been kept a secret until just before launch, creating a level of hype it couldn't possibly meet. Dealers were overstocked, sales were underwhelming from the start, and within 2 years, the Edsel brand was dead. For the Citation specifically, sales were particularly disappointing because it sat at the top of the Edsel range. Buyers willing to spend that much money on a car often opted for a more prestigious Mercury or even a low-end Lincoln, rather than taking a gamble on an unproven brand. By the end of 1958, fewer than 10,000 Citations had been sold, making it a rare car almost immediately after its release. And yet, for all its commercial failure, the Edsel Citation has earned a strange kind of cult status. Its outrageous grille, eccentric features, and association with one of Detroit's biggest marketing flops have made it a beloved oddity among collectors of unusual American iron. Restored examples draw curious crowds at car shows, where people alternately praise its mid-century bravado or laugh at its design excesses. One former owner summed it up perfectly. "Everywhere I went, people stared. Some laughed. I got used to it. After a while, I realized I didn't care, because I liked that it was different. It didn't look like anything else on the road, and, in its own way, that made it special." Today, the Edsel Citation stands as both a warning and a reminder. In the automotive world, standing out can make you unforgettable, but it can just as easily make you infamous. In 1958, that distinction made all the difference. If you'd like, I can now give the same long, dramatic treatment to another equally bizarre 1950s American flop that never shared a single part with the Edsel. The 1960 Taylor-Dunn Trident is one of those rare vehicles that seems less like something designed for serious transportation and more like an accidental gift from the whimsical side of engineering. In an era when America was obsessed with tail fins, chrome, and big V8 engines, the Trident arrived as if it had come from an alternate dimension, or perhaps a children's Saturday morning cartoon. In truth, its origins were entirely utilitarian. Taylor-Dunn, a California-based company, was known for producing small, sturdy electric utility carts used in warehouses, factories, and airports. These were machines built to quietly shuffle workers and cargo around at low speed in industrial settings, not to inspire consumer desire. Yet, somehow, someone in the company looked at their workhorse carts and thought, why not make one for the public? The result was the Trident, a three-wheeled, open-sided electric runabout that looked like a cross between a carnival ride and a set piece from a low-budget 1960s sci-fi film. Measuring barely over 8 feet long and only a few feet wide, the Trident had almost no visual mass. It was essentially a rolling platform with a canopy. The body was skeletal, its sides completely open, with a single small door cut into the driver's side. The real showpiece, however, was the clear bubble canopy that covered the tandem's seating arrangement. Made of curved, transparent plastic, this bubble roof gave the occupants an unobstructed view of the world, while also making the entire vehicle resemble a toy spaceship, or the kind of transportation the Jetsons might have parked in their driveway. The seating was strictly one behind the other, much like a tandem bicycle or a fighter jet cockpit, except without the speed, the aerodynamics, or the armament. The driver sat up front with a large, simple steering handlebar in place of a conventional wheel, while the passenger sat directly behind, their view framed by the driver's shoulders and the gentle arc of the canopy. There were no real creature comforts, no dashboard full of dials, and certainly no climate control. If you wanted ventilation, you simply lifted the bubble roof or drove a little faster. Faster, of course, is a relative term. The Trident's tiny electric motor was good for a top speed of about 15 miles per hour, slower than a determined bicyclist, and barely enough to outpace a jogger. The range was equally modest, making it better suited for neighborhood puttering than crosstown travel. It was powered by a bank of lead-acid batteries hidden beneath the seat, charged overnight by plugging into a standard wall socket. Even in the early 1960s, when electric cars were rare novelties, this was not a machine designed for speed or distance. Yet what the Trident lacked in performance, it more than made up for in spectacle. Driving one down a suburban street was like starting a parade without meaning to. Children would point and wave, adults would stop whatever they were doing to watch, and even dogs seemed momentarily confused by the tiny bubble-topped contraption humming past. It didn't blend in. It couldn't. Owners reported that every trip, no matter how mundane, became a small social event. One early adopter put it best, "I bought it because it looked like nothing else. I knew it was slow, but I didn't care. The first time I drove it down Main Street, people followed me for 3 blocks just to get a closer look. It felt like I was the marshal of my own parade." Another said, "The Trident was useless for almost everything except making people smile. And that was enough for me." It was, of course, impractical in nearly every conventional sense. It had almost no storage space, was vulnerable to the weather despite the canopy, and lacked the safety features even microcars of the day offered. But it was never about practicality. It was a curiosity, a conversation piece, and in some small way, a statement. Not every vehicle needs to be serious. Today, surviving Tridents are incredibly rare, most having been retired from factory duty decades ago or simply abandoned when their batteries died. The few that remain, often restored to pristine condition, are beloved by collectors who appreciate automotive oddities and aren't afraid of a little attention. At car shows, they draw bigger crowds than far more expensive classics, precisely because they look like something that escaped from a futuristic amusement park ride. The 1960 Taylor-Dunn Trident reminds us that cars can be more than machines. They can be moving spectacles, whimsical objects that turn the ordinary act of getting from one place to another into a public performance. In a way, it wasn't just transportation, it was theater on 3 wheels. I can give the next one the same long theatrical treatment to another odd, ultra-rare small American vehicle from the 1950s that made the Trident look almost sensible.
The 1962 Checker Aerobus was the kind of machine that could only have been born in an era when American automotive thinking swung wildly between practical workhorse and why not make it absurdly huge. Checker Motors, based in Kalamazoo, Michigan, had already made its name producing the iconic yellow taxis that seemed to run forever. Their standard sedans and marathon models were blocky, tough, and famously unglamorous. Vehicles that didn't mind the abuse of 100,000 hard city miles and still looked the same after 20 years. But then, someone, somewhere, decided that if a checker sedan could carry 6 passengers comfortably, why not stretch it out to carry twice as many? Thus, the Aerobus was born, not so much designed as elongated by brute force. Visually, the Aerobus was surreal. Imagine taking a standard checker cab, grabbing both ends and pulling until it became limousine length. But instead of elegant limousine proportions, it simply repeated the same door and window sections like a photocopy machine gone haywire. The result could be up to 9 full passenger doors per side, making it look like a train car that had wandered onto a road. In its longest form, it could stretch nearly 27 feet, longer than most buses of the day, and yet still had that unmistakable checker face with its upright grille and no-nonsense taxi trim. Inside, it was exactly what it looked like, row after row of bench seats. Depending on configuration, the Aerobus could carry anywhere from 12 to 15 passengers along with their luggage. And because it was built on the same rugged underpinnings as Checker's workhorse taxis, it was surprisingly durable under heavy use. Powered by stout inline 6s or small block V8s sourced from Chevrolet, it was never quick. Acceleration was more rolling start than launch. But it could lug a full load of tourists and their suitcases all day long without complaint. Checker engineers didn't fuss with style updates or newfangled gimmicks. The Aerobus existed solely to do one job: move people. Its main habitat was the airport, where its sheer length looked normal against the backdrop of buses, hangars, and jetliners. But occasionally one would stray into civilian traffic, and that's when it caused double takes, jaw drops, and even traffic slowdowns. Seeing an Aerobus parked on a small-town street was like seeing a stretched giraffe. Recognizable, but wrong. People weren't sure whether to be impressed, amused, or a little alarmed. An owner who bought a retired Aerobus for private use in the 1970s remembered, "Driving it through downtown was hilarious. People thought it was some kind of movie prop or a traveling circus bus. Parking was, well, let's just say I didn't do a lot of parallel parking." Another recalled, "When I picked my kids up from school in it, the whole class wanted a ride. We could fit half the football team and still have room for the coach." Checker didn't market the Aerobus to ordinary families. There was no illusion that this was a practical suburban car. It was aimed squarely at hotels, resorts, and airports that needed something cheaper and more flexible than a full-size bus, yet capable of hauling more than a standard van. Its square, unpretentious design meant it didn't look dated quickly, and its mechanical simplicity made it easy for fleet mechanics to keep running for decades. Still, its sheer oddity limited its appeal. Outside of its intended role, it was simply too much vehicle. You didn't take it grocery shopping unless you planned to buy everything in the store. Driving it down narrow streets required patience and precision, and its turning circle was best measured in city blocks. And while passengers had plenty of space, anyone riding in the far back might as well have been in a different zip code from the driver. Today, surviving Aerobuses are rare, partly because many spent their working lives in hard service, racking up astronomical mileage until they were scrapped. Those that remain often find homes with collectors of automotive oddities, where they serve as conversation pieces at car shows. Their sheer size and comical repetition of doors still draw crowds, and the sight of one slowly rumbling past remains an optical illusion in motion, like a checker cab caught in the hall of mirrors. The 1962 Checker Aerobus stands as a monument to a very specific kind of American practicality. If something works, just make more of it. Literally. It was the taxi that swallowed a bus, the limousine with the heart of a work truck, and one of the strangest vehicles ever to roll out of Kalamazoo.
The 1969 American Motors AMX-3 is one of those strange, shimmering mirages in American automotive history. A car that seemed to leap straight from the pages of a European design magazine and land, improbably, in the hands of a company better known for economy cars and practical family sedans. This was the late 1960s when American Motors Corporation, the smallest of Detroit's Big Four, was still riding the underdog wave, trying to claw market share away from Ford, GM, and Chrysler. They had muscle cars like the Javelin and the two-seat AMX, quirky compacts like the Rambler, and a reputation for building affordable, sensible cars. Which is why the AMX-3 felt like a hallucination, a mid-engine, hand-built, Italian-styled supercar with a roaring American V8. The project's origins read like a fever dream of what if? AMC executives wanted a true halo car, something that could put their name in the same breath as Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Di Tommaso. So they turned to the most exotic talent they could find, Giotto Bizzarini, the legendary Italian engineer who had worked on the Ferrari 250 GTO, helped shape the Lamborghini 350 GT, and created his own Bizzarini 5300 GT Strada. The AMX-3's body was shaped in Turin with that unmistakable late 60s Italian flair, impossibly low, with a long wedge-like nose, curvious fenders, a steeply raked windshield, and muscular haunches over massive rear wheels. From some angles, it looked like a lost Di Tommaso prototype, from others, like the love child of a Mangusta and a Miura. Underneath, though, was pure American brawn. AMC slotted in their 390 cubic inch V8, tuned to a healthy 340 horsepower, paired with a 4-speed manual transaxle. The car's steel monocoque chassis, designed for rigidity and balance, made it heavier than some European rivals, but it delivered impressive stability. With a top speed of around 160 miles per hour and the ability to sprint from 0 to 60 in about 5.5 seconds, it was no paper tiger. But the magic wasn't just in the numbers, it was in the way the AMX-3 felt. Test driver Mark Donohue reportedly praised its road manners, noting it had the stability of a race car with the civility of a touring coupe. Yet as spectacular as it looked and performed, the AMX-3 was born under a dark cloud of corporate reality. AMC had no experience mass-producing something this complex or exotic. Each car was hand-built in Italy by Bizzarini's team, which meant labor was slow and costs skyrocketed. The projected retail price, over $10,000 in 1970, would have put it right up against Ferraris and Lamborghinis, but without the cachet of their names. Worse, AMC was already facing financial strain, and with U.S. safety and emissions regulations tightening for 1971, the bean counters started asking the obvious question: how many people would actually buy an AMC-branded exotic for Ferrari money? Public reaction was a mix of awe and confusion. People couldn't reconcile the badge on the nose with the body before their eyes. At a press showing, one journalist reportedly quipped, "It looks like Modena on the outside and Kenosha under the hood." An early test driver recalled pulling into a gas station where a bystander circled the car slowly before asking, "Is that an AMC? Like Rambler AMC?" The disconnect was part of its charm. It was the blue-collar automaker that dared to dress in Italian silk. Only 6 examples were completed before AMC pulled the plug, making it rarer than almost any contemporary exotic. Those 6 cars scattered into private collections, occasionally surfacing at concours events where they still leave people blinking in disbelief. Seeing one in person is surreal. It's low enough to make a Corvette look tall, its proportions all swooping curves and taut muscle, but the AMC badge gleams proudly on the nose like an inside joke for automotive historians. Owners today speak about the AMX-3 with a mixture of pride and incredulity. One said, "Driving it is like having an Italian opera sung by a baritone from Detroit. You get the finesse and the drama, but the voice is pure muscle." Another described the reaction it gets at shows. People walk past rows of Ferraris and stop cold at the AMX-3. They don't know what it is, but they know it shouldn't exist, and that's why it's perfect. The AMX-3 remains one of the great what-if stories of American car making, proof that even a small, sensible, budget-conscious company could, for one brief, glorious moment, dream like the Italians and build a car that belonged in the same league. It was the supercar from Kenosha that looked like it belonged in Monaco, a fleeting reminder that in the late 1960s, the line between Detroit and Modena was once, just once, crossed. If you want, I can now give the same ultra-long cinematic treatment to another almost mythical American prototype that blended foreign design with American muscle but died before it could reach production.
The 1970 Vanguard Sebring Superfly was the kind of car that made people stop mid-step, not because they were admiring its elegance, but because they were trying to figure out if it had just escaped from a movie set. Imagine taking a perfectly respectable Cadillac Eldorado, already a massive front-wheel drive land yacht dripping with chrome, and handing it over to a designer who had been locked in a room with nothing but James Bond films, Las Vegas casino lights, and a stack of custom car magazines from the wildest fringes of the 1960s. What rolled out of that fever dream was the Superfly. Part luxury coupe, part parade float, part cartoon villain getaway car. The Superfly was the work of Vanguard Motor Corporation in Florida in collaboration with the Sebring Vanguard Company, best known for dabbling in oddball electric vehicles. But the Superfly had nothing to do with economy or efficiency. It was an unapologetic rolling statement piece aimed squarely at the kind of buyer who wanted everyone to see them coming from 2 blocks away. It started life as a brand new Cadillac Eldorado, but almost every inch of the body was modified. The front end sprouted a massive waterfall grille flanked by chrome fangs that jutted forward like a predatory smile. Gold paint wrapped the entire car in a metallic sheen that seemed to glow under streetlights, while fake side exhaust pipes ran along the rocker panels like the fang's venomous companions. The roofline was chopped and reworked to flow into exaggerated rear haunches with opera windows and landau bars for that extra private lounge vibe. Inside, the original Cadillac luxury was dialed up to something bordering on surreal. Plush, button-tufted upholstery in deep velour or crushed velvet, often in clashing colors, covered nearly every surface. Thick shag carpeting could be ordered to match or contrast the seats, and there were gold accents everywhere. Gold steering wheel spokes, gold trim around the dash, gold bezels for the gauges. It was the kind of interior that seemed purpose-built for a blaxploitation film hero, a disco-era record producer, or a TV supervillain who smoked cigars and laughed in echoing hallways. Under the hood, the Superfly remained pure Cadillac. The standard 500 cubic inch V8, one of the largest production engines in history, offered mountains of torque, though the car's sheer mass and aerodynamics meant that it was more of a slow, unstoppable force than a quick getaway machine. Buyers weren't looking for performance anyway. They wanted presence, and presence the Superfly had in abundance. The car's debut came just as custom super luxury conversions were enjoying a brief fad, with companies like Stutz and Zimmer trying to reinvent the classic luxury coupe with more flamboyance. But even in that over-the-top world, the Superfly was extreme. People either adored its success or were baffled by it. At one car show, a spectator reportedly asked, "Is this for a movie?" Only to be told, "No, it's for real." Another observer, upon seeing the gleaming gold paint and chrome pipes, muttered, "Looks like Liberace's grocery getter." Production numbers were never large. Estimates suggest fewer than 20 were made, partly because the conversion cost was enormous, and partly because the kind of buyer willing to drive something this ostentatious was a rare breed. The Superfly didn't care about subtlety, and it certainly didn't care about resale value. It was a personal statement, as loud as a mirrored suit and as bold as wearing sunglasses indoors at midnight. Owners today describe driving one as a surreal experience. One said, "Every red light turns into a photo op. You see people mouthing, 'What is that?' and I just smile." Another admitted, "You don't buy a Superfly unless you're ready for stares, comments, and the occasional person asking if you're a pimp from 1973. Today, the Vanguard Sebring Superfly survives as a fascinating relic of a time when the automotive world occasionally abandoned restraint entirely. It's remembered not for engineering innovation or performance benchmarks, but for the sheer audacity of its design. In a world of safe,
wind tunnel-tested sameness, the Superfly still looks like a golden outlaw that refuses to blend in, and that's exactly why it's unforgettable. I can now give you a just as long deep dive on another little-known American custom luxury car from the same era that was equally outrageous but took a completely different design approach.
The 1974 FMC 2900R motor coach was one of those rare vehicles that could pull up next to you at a stoplight and instantly make you feel like you just stumbled into a science fiction movie. It was sleek, streamlined, and almost unnervingly modern for its time. The kind of design that made you wonder whether it had quietly rolled out of a NASA hangar after a secret project got shelved. And in a way, that wasn't far from the truth, because the company that built it, FMC, short for Food Machinery Corporation, wasn't a typical RV maker at all. This was a firm whose bread and butter was manufacturing military equipment, including armored personnel carriers. So when they decided to enter the luxury motorhome business in the early 1970s, they applied the same industrial-grade engineering and purposeful design language that had kept soldiers safe on the battlefield. The 2900R was introduced in 1973, right in the middle of America's motorhome boom, but it immediately set itself apart from the boxy Winnebagos and slab-sided GMCs that dominated the roads. Instead of looking like a glorified delivery truck with windows, the FMC was all smooth curves and clean lines, with a low stance that made it look ready to race a bullet train. The front was dominated by a massive wraparound panoramic windshield that extended so far forward the driver practically sat over the front axle. This gave an almost cockpit-like driving position, part bus, part locomotive, part jetliner, and provided a commanding view of the road ahead, though first-time drivers often admitted it was a little unnerving to be perched so far forward without a long hood in sight. The body was a one-piece fiberglass shell over a steel frame, which made it both lightweight for its size and far more rigid than many rival RVs. Underneath, FMC applied its military know-how to create a torsion bore suspension system that delivered a surprisingly smooth ride for something weighing over 10,000 pounds. Power came from Chrysler's big 440 cubic inch V8 mounted in the rear, which meant the coach was quieter inside and handled more like a large bus than a top-heavy truck. For long-distance travelers, the layout was ideal. Smooth cruising at highway speeds, less wind noise, and excellent weight distribution. Inside, the 2900R was equally unconventional. The floor plan made clever use of its relatively compact length, just 29 feet, to create an interior that felt open and airy. High-end materials like real wood cabinetry, plush seating, and thick carpeting gave it an upscale feel, while the curved sidewalls and large windows reinforced the futuristic vibe. Owners could specify different layouts, but most came with a forward lounge, a compact but functional kitchen, a mid-cabin bathroom, and a rear bedroom. It was designed for extended touring in comfort, and many were used exactly that way, some owners racking up hundreds of thousands of miles without complaint. The public, however, didn't quite know what to make of it. Park one next to a standard RV, and it looked like a visitor from the future. Kids would point at it, asking if it was a bus or maybe a train car that had somehow escaped the rails. Adults sometimes mistook it for a prototype vehicle undergoing road tests. One owner recalled, "I'd pull into a gas station and people would stop pumping just to come over and ask, 'What is that thing?' Half the time they didn't believe me when I said it was just my RV." Another owner quipped, "I think I've given more tours of my FMC in parking lots than I have on actual campgrounds." Despite its futuristic looks and excellent engineering, the FMC 2900R was a victim of timing. The 1973 oil crisis hit just as production was ramping up, and suddenly the idea of buying a premium motor coach with a thirsty 440 V8 seemed less appealing. FMC managed to build just over 1,000 units between 1973 and 1976 before pulling the plug on RV production entirely.
The company returned to its core defense contracts, leaving the FMC 2900R as a brief but brilliant detour into civilian transportation. Today, surviving FMC coaches have a devoted following among vintage RV enthusiasts. Their combination of military-grade durability, distinctive styling, and surprisingly modern road manners means many are still in active use half a century later. Seeing one on the highway is still an event. It glides past with a low, purposeful hum, looking like it's headed either to a campground or to rendezvous with a space shuttle. And in a way, that's the charm of the 2900R. It was built to feel like nothing else on the road, and 50 years later, it still delivers on that promise. If you want, I can now give the same ultra-long treatment to the next unusual vehicle in your list of unusual vehicles to keep the collection consistent in depth and style.
The 1978 Dodge Aspen Kit Car edition is one of those wild moments when Detroit's marketing teams decided to have a little fun by blurring the lines between street cars and the racetrack, whether buyers were ready for it or not. At a glance, it looked like a typical late 70s Aspen, a compact to mid-size sedan or coupe aimed at the everyday American family. But slap on the Kit Car Edition package, and suddenly this ordinary Dodge transformed into a faux NASCAR beast with paint schemes and decals ripped straight from the world of stock car racing. The idea was to cash in on the soaring popularity of Richard Petty, the King, whose distinctive style and monster success on the track had made him a national icon. Dodge wanted to bring that excitement to the streets in a way that was affordable, flashy, and just a little bit cheeky. The Kit Car Edition's visual identity was loud, unapologetic, and borderline garish, even by the high decibel aesthetics of 1970s muscle cars. It featured huge, bold, sponsored decals plastered across the doors, hood, and rear panels. Brands like STP, Mopar, Goodyear, and others you'd recognize from the NASCAR circuit. These graphics weren't subtle. They screamed race car, complete with bright racing stripes, oversized numbers, and sometimes even faux air intakes or hood pins that were purely decorative. Dodge didn't bother hiding the fact that this was a street-legal costume, a way for everyday drivers to get a taste of the stock car spectacle without the roaring engines or tire smoke. Mechanically, though, the Kit Car Edition was largely unchanged from the standard Aspen. Under the hood, you'd typically find the familiar 225 cubic inch inline-six or a modest V8, neither of which came close to the thunderous power or handling prowess of real race machines. Suspension, brakes, and chassis components were all pedestrian, designed for cruising suburban streets, not turning laps at Daytona. There were no performance upgrades to match the aggressive looks. It was all about style and attitude, which for some buyers was enough. Public reaction to the Kit Car Edition was mixed at best. Fans of Richard Petty and NASCAR appreciated the homage and enjoyed the playful connection to racing culture, but many others thought the look was over the top or simply odd. To people who didn't know it was a factory-sanctioned package, it could easily look like a car vandalized by a prankster or a teenager with a new sticker obsession. Even among car enthusiasts, it wasn't taken seriously. It was seen more as a marketing gimmick than a real muscle car contender. Sales reflected that ambivalence. Only a small number were made and sold, mostly appealing to hardcore NASCAR fans or collectors who wanted something quirky and different. Today, surviving Dodge Aspen Kit Car editions are rare and often viewed as amusing relics of a time when the muscle car era was winding down and automakers were scrambling for new ways to keep the excitement alive. Their bold, sticker-covered bodies tell a story of a fleeting era when street cars flirted with the world of professional racing in the most literal, colorful way possible. They remain a vivid reminder that sometimes the line between passion and kitsch is razor thin, and that even a humble family sedan can wear a race car's livery and turn heads, if only for a moment of surprise and nostalgia. Owners who cherish these quirky Aspens often recall the strange double takes and smiles they'd get cruising through small towns as people did a double take and wondered, is that real or just a costume? And in a way, that's exactly what the Kit Car edition was meant to be. A street-legal daydream, a rolling tribute to racing glory, and a bright, silly flash from an era when boldness in design was never in short supply.
The 1980 Commute Car occupies a truly unique and fascinating niche in automotive history, representing an era when electric vehicles were little more than experimental oddities, products of necessity during the energy crises of the 1970s, rather than practical solutions ready for mass adoption. Emerging as a spiritual successor to the similarly quirky city car, the Commute Car pushed the boundaries of what an electric city car could be, creating a tiny, wedge-shaped, ultra-compact commuter vehicle that was as much a statement about economy and simplicity as it was about style, albeit in the most minimalist and, some would say, eccentric form imaginable. Measuring less than 9 feet in length and roughly 5 feet wide, the Commute Car's footprint was astonishingly small, so much so that it could easily be parked perpendicular to the curb, a feature that made it a standout in tight urban environments, but also an odd sight on any regular street. This diminutive size was both a blessing and a curse. While it motored excelled at squeezing into spaces where regular cars couldn't, it sacrificed much in terms of comfort, visibility, and performance. The vehicle's sharply angular, wedge-shaped shape gave it a futuristic yet downright strange silhouette, resembling a small doorstop or a piece of industrial equipment more than a traditional automobile. The lack of rear visibility, combined with tiny windows and minimalist mirrors, often left drivers guessing what was behind them, relying heavily on cautious maneuvering in parking lots and city traffic alike. Inside, the Commute Car's interior was Spartan to the extreme. Designed primarily for 2 passengers, the cabin offered bare-bones accommodations with little in the way of comfort or amenities. The seats were small and close together, and the dashboard was almost industrial in its simplicity. There was no rear-view window to speak of, and the overall sense was one of a utilitarian machine, stripped down to the bare essentials required to get from point A to point B in congested urban settings. The controls were rudimentary, and any hopes of driving enjoyment were quickly dashed by the car's glacial acceleration and limited top speed, hovering around a modest 30 miles per hour, and its range, which rarely exceeded 40 miles on a full charge. The electric motor powering the Commute Car was just enough to navigate city streets at a slow, steady pace, but it was never meant for highway speeds or long-distance travel. The battery technology of the time, combined with the car's lightweight and minimal energy consumption, made it an efficient short hauler, but it was laughably underpowered compared to conventional gasoline cars. Its handling, while manageable at low speeds, felt peculiar due to the car's odd proportions and high center of gravity. Owners often joked that driving it was akin to piloting a forklift or a small utility vehicle, underscoring its niche appeal and the fact that it was truly designed for a very specific use case. One of the most telling and endearing quotes from a Commute Car owner captures the vehicle's spirit perfectly. "It was the only car I could clean with Windex." This humorous remark highlights both the car's tiny size and its almost toy-like quality, light, shiny, and straightforward to maintain, but also incredibly fragile and impractical by everyday standards. The Commute Car was never about raw power, speed, or luxury. It was about embracing the weird, wonderful promise of electric propulsion when the technology was still in its infancy, and most manufacturers were unwilling or unable to fully commit to it. In the broader context of automotive history, the Commute Car stands as a relic of a transitional moment. It was a symbol both of desperation and innovation, born out of a fuel crisis that forced manufacturers to experiment wildly with unconventional designs and propulsion systems.
Unlike today's sleek, high-tech electric vehicles, the Commute Car was crude, quirky, and uncompromisingly odd, an honest attempt at urban mobility that was decades ahead of its time, but limited by the technology and market realities of the era. Surviving examples of the Commute Car are exceedingly rare today, treasured by collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate its unusual place in the story of electric vehicles. It remains a vivid reminder that the road to modern EVs was not straight or smooth, but filled with strange detours, curious prototypes, and vehicles that challenged what a car could and should be. The Commute Car, with its wedge shape, microscopic size, and almost absurd practicality, embodies the hope, folly, and enduring charm of those early days when the future of transportation was still wide open, and anything seemed possible. The 1987 Pontiac Fiero GT Mera is one of the most unusual and intriguing chapters in the saga of American sports cars. A strange and bold experiment that combined the everyday accessibility of a General Motors vehicle with the unmistakable allure of Italian exotic design, albeit with a touch of controversy. At first glance, the Mera could fool even some car enthusiasts. It was a Fiero, yes, but dressed in a bespoke body kit that was explicitly styled to evoke the legendary Ferrari 308, one of the most iconic Italian sports cars of the late 70s and early 80s. This meant that buyers could walk into a Pontiac dealership and drive away in a car that looked like a budget Ferrari clone, an audacious move that both fascinated and perplexed the automotive world. The Mera was the product of Mera Automotive, a small company in Florida that specialized in modifying Fieros to give them a sleek, exotic makeover. The transformation wasn't just cosmetic. The car's fiberglass panels were entirely replaced to mimic the Ferrari's flowing lines, including its distinctive rear window louver and sharply sculpted side air intakes. However, beneath this Italian-inspired skin was the familiar Pontiac Fiero chassis and drivetrain, mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, powered by a V6 engine that, while competent, was no match for the performance and pedigree of a true Ferrari. The result was a fascinating, if somewhat ironic, juxtaposition: the exotic aesthetics of a supercar combined with the more humble and practical underpinnings of an American sports coupe. Legally, the Mera occupied a curious gray area. It was sold through official Pontiac dealerships as a factory-authorized conversion, which gave it a veneer of legitimacy, but it clearly drew inspiration too closely from Ferrari's unmistakable design. Ferrari, protective of their brand and styling, eventually took legal action against Mera Automotive, arguing that the car infringed on their intellectual property and caused market confusion. The lawsuit effectively ended the Mera's brief run, and only about 247 examples were sold before production ceased. This limited production run instantly made the Mera one of the rarest Pontiac models from the era, and a sought-after curiosity among collectors today. From a performance perspective, the Mera was essentially the same as the base Fiero GT, meaning it offered decent but not spectacular handling and power. The Fiero's 2.8-liter V6 engine produced around 140 horsepower, enough to give the car peppy acceleration for the time, especially given its relatively lightweight body. But unlike the Ferrari 308's 255 horsepower V8, the Mera's engine was more aligned with everyday practicality than supercar thrills. Still, it was a fun, nimble mid-engine car with a balanced feel that made it a favorite among budget sports car fans who appreciated its quirky charm and distinctive looks. The interior of the Mera remained largely unchanged from the Fiero, featuring the simple but functional cockpit design with comfortable seats and basic amenities. It was a stark contrast to the flashy exterior, highlighting the blend of exotic design aspirations and practical realities that defined the car. The Mera was never about luxury or status. It was about the fantasy of owning a Ferrari-like machine without the supercar price tag or maintenance nightmare. Owners of the Mera often share stories that blend pride with a touch of amusement. Many enjoyed the double takes and curious glances the car attracted. Seeing a Pontiac with the styling of an Italian exotic was a conversation starter, but it also came with a few challenges, especially when Ferrari fans or purists called out the car for being an obvious copycat. Some owners appreciated the Mara's tongue-in-cheek nature, embracing it as a unique expression of 1980s car culture, where boldness sometimes trumped subtlety. Today, the Pontiac Fiero GT Mara remains a fascinating footnote in automotive history, an intersection of American ingenuity, Italian design inspiration, and legal drama. It embodies a moment when the lines between homage, imitation, and original creation blurred, resulting in a car that was as much a pop culture oddity as it was a driver's car. For collectors and enthusiasts, owning a Mara means possessing a rare piece of automotive rebellion, a car that dared to dream big, even if the dream was a little mischievous and fleeting.
The 2001 Pontiac Aztek is often remembered as one of the most controversial and polarizing vehicles ever produced by General Motors. And its story is a fascinating study in bold ambition, design risk, and market rejection. Launched at a time when crossover SUVs were beginning to capture the public's imagination, GM aimed to create a vehicle that would appeal to younger, active buyers craving versatility, utility, and a sense of adventure. The Aztek was intended to be a lifestyle vehicle, a versatile, sporty SUV that could serve as a camping companion, a weekend getaway machine, or a practical family hauler. In theory, it was a brilliant idea, packaged with thoughtful and genuinely innovative features for its day. In reality, it became an automotive lightning rod, criticized mercilessly for its jarring, unconventional styling that many found outright ugly. At first glance, the Aztek's exterior was a curious, complicated puzzle of shapes, angles, and layered surfaces. Its design blended influences from rugged off-road vehicles, sporty SUVs, and futuristic styling experiments, but failed to harmonize them into a cohesive whole. The front end featured a wide, almost blunt nose with split headlights that bulged awkwardly from the body, while the rear's split glass hatchback, divided by a prominent plastic panel, created a visually confusing effect. The body cladding layered thick plastic panels that gave it a heavy, somewhat ungainly look. Its proportions were peculiar, with a squat stance and chunky wheels that attempted to emphasize toughness, but ultimately made the car appear bulky and unrefined. Many people reacted with confusion, disbelief, and even amusement, as the Aztek defied traditional aesthetic rules and expectations of beauty. Internally at GM, some executives were reportedly baffled or disappointed by the final design, feeling the car's looks compromised its commercial potential. Yet, beneath its polarizing exterior lay a thoughtfully engineered vehicle built to accommodate the lifestyle needs of its target audience. Inside, the Aztek offered an impressively spacious and flexible cabin with a removable rear seat that could fold flat to create a large cargo area. The interior featured practical, durable materials designed to withstand the demands of active owners. Unique options included a built-in camping tent that could attach to the back of the vehicle, a removable cooler integrated into the center console, and modular storage solutions designed to organize gear for outdoor activities. These unique features demonstrated Pontiac's commitment to creating a utility crossover that was more than just a car. It was meant to be a companion for weekend adventures and lifestyle expression. Performance-wise, the Aztek came equipped with a reliable 3.4-liter V6 engine, producing adequate power for city driving, highway cruising, and light off-road use. It wasn't a sports car, nor did it aspire to be one. Instead, it was built to provide a comfortable, smooth ride with sufficient capability for the occasional dirt road or camping trip. All-wheel drive was available, improving traction in poor weather and mild off-road conditions, and the chassis was tuned for comfort rather than aggressive handling. This combination made it a functional vehicle for a wide range of practical uses, from hauling groceries to towing small trailers. Despite its practicality and innovative features, the Aztek quickly became a cultural punchline, with critics and consumers alike targeting its odd appearance. The media's harsh reviews, combined with negative public perception, damaged its sales momentum. Even some Pontiac dealers reportedly struggled to sell the car, and many potential buyers were put off simply because of how it looked. The vehicle's unique styling alienated the very audience it sought to attract, turning what was meant to be a fresh and exciting concept into a cautionary tale. Over its production run from 2001 to 2005, fewer than 28,000 units were sold, a fraction of GM's expectations. Yet, the Aztek's story didn't end with commercial failure.
Over time, it developed a cult following among car enthusiasts and collectors, who appreciated its unapologetic individuality and utility. Some fans admired it for breaking conventional design rules and for offering features that were ahead of their time. The car's distinctive silhouette and quirky charm made it instantly recognizable, a car that dared to be different in an era of growing homogeneity. Its appearances in pop culture, including the hit TV series Breaking Bad, helped cement its legacy as an icon of unconventional style and offbeat personality. Today, the Pontiac Aztek stands as a fascinating chapter in automotive history, a vehicle that combined ambitious innovation with stylistic risk-taking that few dared to attempt. It reminds us that not all experiments in design and marketing succeed in their time, but that they can leave a lasting impression, sparking debates, nostalgic affection, and new appreciation decades later. The Aztek is more than just a failed SUV. It's a symbol of boldness, eccentricity, and the unpredictable nature of automotive trends. It's a car that may never win beauty contests, but will always be remembered for its courage to be wildly different, embodying a unique spirit that lives on far beyond the showroom floor.